You cannot videotape police activity if there's a reasonable expectation of privacy by anyone there. They've also said you can't interfere or obstruct police activity.
The issue that is happening is when there is unlawful speech, when it's not protected.
Okay, so you want to pontificate. We realize that you were brought here to pontificate the Democrats' deal. Yeah, you don't need to repeat everything I say. You can either agree or disagree. That's fine. This is not peaceful protest.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayell, isn't it true that there are constraints on the use of First Amendment speech rights?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, the First Amendment.
There's constraints on it, right? And it's permissible for individuals to protest in America, right?
There are rights to protest in the United States of
and
America.
People can even, courts have found, I mean, these are yes or no. You don't need to.
Sure.
If you filibuster, which sometimes people like to do, we'll never get through this. But I'm going to make sure we get through it no matter how much over time I go, just like the Democrats are. People can even video police actions in public spaces, right? Courts have held that.
Yes.
Multiple courts, right?
Yes.
But there is a caveat to that right, isn't there? There's a list of constraints even there, right? So, for instance, you cannot videotape police activity if there's a reasonable expectation of privacy by anyone there, right? That's what the courts say.
I'm not following that. You have a right to videotape law enforcement when law enforcement is conducting its activity in public spaces.
In public spaces, right? But if there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, courts have said that you can't go beyond that. They've also said you can't interfere or obstruct police activities, right?
The First Amendment does not protect interference with law enforcement, obstruction.
Yeah, you don't need to repeat everything I say. You can either agree or disagree. That's fine. If there's an intention to interfere, or if the individual should have known that they were interfering, their right to videotape is not protected. Isn't that true?
The issue that is happening is when there is unlawful speech. When it's not protected, it does not give law enforcement the right to wildly pepper spray. It does not give them the right to deploy tear gas.
Okay, so you want to pontificate. We realize that you were brought here to pontificate the Democrats' deal.
I was brought here to tell you what's happening on the ground in Minnesota, and it is happening, and it is being recognized by Republicans and Democrats.
The time belongs to the gentleman. The time belongs to the gentleman from Arizona.
Yeah, I'm asking you questions. You answer them. You can agree or disagree, but these are very simple. I think you'll get them even, because they're yes or no questions. The individual cannot videotape if they're not if it actually hinders public safety. Isn't that true?
You're not allowed to interfere with law enforcement.
You can't.
You're talking about hypothetical scenarios.
If you are impeding public safety, courts have held you can't get there. Apparently, I can't ask you questions because you're not going to answer truthfully. Here we go. Here's the deal.
I have answered that.
Here's the deal.
You cannot
impede law enforcement. It's my turn. I'd like to reclaim it. Here's the deal. If you are impeding public safety, the courts have said you cannot continue to videotape. The courts have said the police can set distance parameters that the public must stand back from to preserve public safety or to prevent damage to a crime scene. You would agree with that much at least, right?
Yes, there are limits to protected speech.
You can't enter private property. You can only do it on public property, right?
There are limits to protected speech. You're giving hypotheticals that are really broad.
These are court cases. You can't trespass either, right? You cannot violate someone's privacy rights. That is all true.
Yes.
That's true. Let's watch a video real quick here of what's going on in Minnesota. This is not peaceful protest. What you have there in that first scene is not peaceful protest. That is not protected speech. And if you look at the statute, and I assume that you have, Mr. Mayell, if you look at the statutes here, and the courts have upheld it, something called administrative warrants, where you have a reasonable suspicion to believe somebody's in this country illegally, you are allowed to make the stop, you're allowed to make the arrest, you're allowed to pursue them that way. reasonable suspicion is the standard under INA Section 236. So when I look at this and I listen to you, and I'm looking at, and I'm sorry you folks have come here, you've seen the real attack is coming from the left on speech rights in this country. And here's the beautiful part about it. Because they have conviction and they have so much passion, they think they're correct. They think that's true. But so much of what we've heard today is inaccurate, false, and wrong. And here's the bottom line. Conviction and passion does not make you correct. Sometimes it just makes you crazy. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In part one of this hearing earlier, I asked our witness, Professor David Kaye, what this country would look like if the majority did not join the minority in checking First Amendment violations committed by the government. And we were warned that there would be dark days ahead. Well, sadly, we're in those dark days right now. This government was built to include checks and balances, a practice that has protected this democracy for the last 240 years. Democrats have done our part in honoring that constitutional intent. Whether in the majority or in the minority, we have taken the time to ensure that we are truly doing our job, providing oversight to other branches, regardless of the party that is governing in the White House. Will my colleagues across the aisle commit to doing the same? Secretary Noem has done nothing to rein in her agents, to remind or even to inform them that it's unconstitutional to impede on First Amendment rights. We've seen countless videos and justified outrage after federal immigration enforcement agents shot and killed a 37-year-old woman, Renee Nicole Good, a mother, a poet, and a writer. Operation Metro Surge continued, and protesters continued to exercise their rights. Not even 3 weeks later, 37-year-old ICU nurse Alex Preddy was helping others and recording on his phone when officers surrounded him and proceeded to shoot him 11 times in the back. When protesters are literally being shot in the street as they exercise their First Amendment rights, gunned down while peacefully protesting heightened enforcement operations, targeted raids that break up families, and the oppression of their communities by agents of their own federal government, I know for a fact that these situations are what we should be talking about, not Europe, our own. We should be focusing on the government agencies here at home that are impeding the constitutional rights of our citizens. From the First Amendment to the 14th Amendment, even due process rights right here in America are being violated. So much so that a government attorney asked to be held in contempt just to get sleep because ICE arrests have been so sloppy that her office has become overwhelmed with ICE because ICE complies with the flooded court orders coming in. Mr. Chair, I have a unanimous consent request. I'd like to enter into the record this article from Fox News entitled, "ICE Attorney, This Job Sucks."
Without objection.
Thank you. In which attorney Julie Lee, she states, and I quote, "The system sucks, this job sucks. I'm trying with every breath I have to get you what I need," end quote.
Without objection.
Thank you. People across our country are taking to the streets, asking for justice, calling for federal law enforcement to leave their communities, and they're demanding accountability. And this continued threat to our First Amendment rights extends to voting and elections. In my home state of Georgia, federal election investigations and enforcement actions have created fear, confusion, and hesitation among voters and election workers alike. All for an election that was decided over 5 years ago, over a vote count that leaders from the sitting president's own party have affirmed to be lawful and correct. These tactics are meant to scare voters and make them worry that their vote and therefore their voice is not going to matter. Volunteers may step back rather than step forward. That is how suppression works in practice, not only through the laws on the books, but through fear and discourages participation. Mr. Mayell, you have said that Minnesotans are foregoing basic daily tasks. Their children aren't even going to school. If conditions persist, how could the government's response to citizens exercising their First Amendment rights impact our voter turnout and our upcoming elections?
Thank you for the question. I can tell you right now that the feeling in Minnesota is one of disruption. Normal day-to-day activities, we're talking about work, groceries, going to school, have been disrupted significantly. And I think that if we continue to have this presence of this federal force, life will continue to be disrupted.
Thank you for that, and I contend to say that there are going to even be darker days in our future, and I yield.